I knew that we had the recorders and the cameras around, and I could only hope that they were recording everything. At this point, I didn't know if Henry and I would survive this. At least if something happened, the footage would be there. There wasn't anything Henry and I could do. If we came out, we would certainly be killed. The Bigfoot was drawn up here for some reason, and now it had sparked a full-on territorial war. I wondered how many more Bigfoot would come up here, and how many more dogmen would come out. We were sitting ducks. I looked over at Henry, and he was sitting with his knees bent to his chest and his arms wrapped around them. He wore the same fear on his face that I had. The knocks grew louder, and it sounded like an army of large men were making their way to our location. The ground vibrated with every step they took. "We're not going to make it out of here, are we, Mark?" Henry asked. I sighed. "We have to think positive. I know that's hard to do, surrounded by two very large creatures who want to rip each other's throat out, but this is where we are right now. If Connie taught me anything, it's that you can't take yourself out of a tough spot with a negative mind. It'll only make it worse." The fire was going and the shadows were dancing along the sides of the tent. We could see the legs of the dogman and hoped that it was the only one. At that point, I'd only seen one Bigfoot, but the footfalls of the others were not far behind. The necklace glowed a bright purple and began to shake. Henry quickly threw his pillow over it so it wouldn't be seen or heard. We certainly didn't need any warning that they were there. We knew that already. If the necklace could make them go away, then we would want to wait until the rest of them were here and not just one here near us. Loud shrieks rang out everywhere and echoed off the sides of the rocks of the mountain. Then darkness shrouded the tent with only broken glimpses of wrestling shadows that we could see because of the glow of the fire. Loud thuds and snarls were right beside the tent, and I could only hope that they were too focused on each other and they weren't going to rip the tent open and pull us out. We made our way to the back corner of the tent in hopes that if one of these huge animals fell, it wouldn't crush us. It would undoubtedly be like the weight of a small car landing directly on top of us if it did. Just then, small drops of blood streaked across the sides of the tent. This was first blood. The Bigfoot let out a boisterous yell, and then more came thundering beside us. Then we heard more trees being pushed apart. It was more dogmen. I quickly went through what we had for protection and found our most valuable asset, the walkie-talkie, and the cavalry was just on the other side of it. I leaned over and keyed up the mic. "John, Connie, come in. Are you there?" I whispered. "What's up, Mark?" John asked. "Henry and I are in quite a jam, and we need a distraction. A big one. I need you guys to be as loud as you possibly can. I can explain it all when we get out of here, but right now, you need to trust me. Just be loud." "I think I heard you right, Mark, but there's a ton of background noises. Are you okay?" "I don't have time to explain. Currently we're fine, but I don't know for how much longer. Please hurry," I said. Henry and I sat as still as possible while the bodies fell around us. We could still see the glow of the necklace just under the edge of the pillow. It was at its most vibrant when the dogmen were nearest us in the battle. I didn't quite understand why they hadn't done anything with the tent. It was baffling me. "Those Bigfoot know that we're in here, and I'm sure the dogmen do too. It may have something to do with the necklace as well," Henry said. "But if I had to take a wild guess, I would say that the Bigfoot are protecting us. Whatever the cause, I was glad that we were safe and still in one piece." I can't say how intact my sanity currently was, however. We sat for what seemed like forever waiting on something to happen with John and Connie. I hoped that it was them taking a while because they were planning something big. I just wished they would hurry up. Shotgun blast rang out and air horns screamed through the trees. With every shot that was fired, we could hear footfalls retreating away from us. Loud howls and screams were moving into every direction. Henry moved the pillow and saw that the necklace had stopped glowing, proving that the dogmen were gone. But we had no idea what that meant for the Bigfoot. Then everything seemed to go quiet, except for the air horns. I cautiously unzipped the tent and peeked out. It looked like a war zone. I motioned for Henry to follow me out, and we carefully crawled out, looking all around us. I had brought a small table to set up the recording devices, and it was broken in half. Instinctively, I started searching for the recorders. I couldn't find them, and I figured that it would be a lost cause to be searching in the dark. A shadow moved in front of us, and we froze. Henry looked back and saw the necklace lying on the tent floor, but it hadn't started glowing. "That's a Bigfoot," Henry whispered. I couldn't believe that I was getting ready to do what I was about to do, but it only felt natural. I couldn't see the Bigfoot fully, but I knew he or she could see me. "We don't want any trouble, okay? We just want to get out of here. Once we get some of our things, we'll go, I said into the darkness. The air horns had stopped, and once again we felt like we were alone. We grabbed the necklace and our flashlights and left the mess and destruction behind. We ran as fast as our legs would carry us out of there. We met John and Connie in the woodline, and we quickly got into the truck and sped out of there. I don't know about y'all, Henry said as we walked in the door, but I need a beer or two. Hell, maybe even 3 after that. We all sat in the kitchen, and Henry and I were quiet for some time before we started talking. We sat there and looked at each other as we drank our beers, not believing what had just happened. I could almost guarantee that we were thinking the same thought. So, John said as he cleared his throat, do either of you want to tell us what happened out there? We still sat silent. I know they deserved to hear about what happened, but mustering up the words to recount it had become more difficult than I thought it would be. I chugged the rest of my beer and opened my next one. My adrenaline was still pulsing, and I was waiting for the effects of the alcohol to set in, at least some, to calm that. I told you some, but the fighting was terrifying. It just walked into camp, and that was all it took, I began. Connie laid her hand on mine. What walked into camp, Mark? Was it a dog man? I shook my head no. Bigfoot. Bigfoot walked into the camp, but it was almost as if it were caught off guard that we were there. We didn't feel threatened by it at all. It didn't mean us any harm. I know it knew we were there, but it didn't mess with us. Then the dog man realized it was there, and it was on from then. How about the necklace, John asked. Did the necklace glow again? Yeah, the necklace glowed, and it didn't stop until you guys started shooting and blasting the air horn. That's how we knew it was safe to come out. Then as we were leaving, a Bigfoot was still there, just in the shadows. Mark told it that we just wanted to leave. After that, we tucked tail and ran, Henry said. I finished my 3rd beer and finally felt calm again. Being around Henry and that dogman at the same time was almost painful. The anger I felt during the whole ordeal was unprecedented. I was beginning to finally feel normal again. So what about this flash you told me about with the necklace? I didn't quite understand it over the walkie, Connie said. Yeah, there's that. I told them the whole thing. They were just as surprised as we were. They didn't understand it either. Didn't Otis say that an old medicine man gave it to him? Maybe that was something that added to it. Maybe if he didn't take the hint, the final protection was to zap them out of there, John went on. Henry laughed. Mark and I talked about that in the woods, John, and I'll tell you the same thing I told him. In essence, Otis was too afraid to stay outside long enough to realize that it did that. Can't blame him, but all this had taken place for no reason. John and Connie just shook their head. I felt the same way. My adrenaline had worn off now, and I was exhausted. Henry looked like he would fall asleep sitting straight up in the chair. John left, and we all went to bed. Honestly, I think I was asleep before my head hit the pillow. I woke up to the sunlight pouring into my window, and I stumbled to the coffee pot. I was still tired from last night's events, but today was a new day, and I was honestly thankful to be able to see it. I walked outside and sat on the deck, taking in the warm rays of the sun. Connie joined me shortly after. She was my motivation in all of this. No matter how this ended, I just wanted to be with her. So, are we going to get the rest of y'all's stuff today, Connie asked. Yeah, we need to. I only rented all that, so I need to see if there's any of it that's salvageable for me to take back. Maybe there'll be something on the recording devices that will be usable. As long as they didn't crush it, that is. It looked like a war zone from what we could see when we crawled out of the tent, but I'm sure in the daylight it'll be much worse. Connie sipped her coffee and set her mug down on the table. Well, I know this may sound odd, but I'm interested to see it myself. Just to know this took place, albeit frightening, it's interesting. We've seen remnants after normal animals have fought in the woods, but seeing the aftermath of these 2 large creatures has to be astounding. She wouldn't be saying any of that, honestly, if she had been there. She wouldn't want to go out in the woods again. John came over and brought Marie with him. She gave me and Henry both a hug. It was out of character for her, but I knew that John had told her what happened, and she was just glad that we were okay. So we're headed back into the woods. I have to get the stuff that's still up there. That other stuff I could care less about. I mean, I don't want to junk up our property, but the devices are the main goal in getting back out there today. The other stuff can be cleaned up later. I was dreading it though, and I could only hope that they were too tired for a round 2 while we were out there. We made it to the campsite, and it was worse than I'd thought. The only thing that still stood was the tent. There were small trees and leaf litter laying around everywhere, but the tent was untouched. It was like a tornado had came through and turned everything else upside down. There was dried blood splattered all over the ground, and the table was broken in half. It was a toss-up about whose blood it was, however. Could have been either. Connie and I just walked around and shook our head as we surveyed all the damage. I walked around moving the loose branches looking for the recorders. This could have been so much worse, she said. Just look at this place. I picked up all the cameras and stuff and I put them in a bag and threw them over my shoulder. Yeah, I know, hon. It absolutely could have been. But something was watching out for us. Bigfoot, Henry said, smiling. It was Bigfoot, I told you. I laughed. Henry was such a kook, but he was funny. Well, that might be the case, but I also think that a higher power had a hand in it as well. We walked out of the woods without incident and made it back home. I spread everything out on the table. It surprisingly looked to be in good condition, considering. Now the question lies, was there anything good on these devices? I laid the recorder on the table and we all sat around listening to it. There were a lot of pops and cracks. I could only assume that that was the campfire dwindling down. Then we heard the footsteps coming into camp. Afterwards, a growl and a scream. Then static. The hair raised up on mine and Henry's arms, and everybody at the table was quiet. Connie stared hard at me. Marie sat with her mouth open, and John just hung his head. I'd be interested to see, even though that's just a small clip before it quits, if Ashton has heard any of those noises, I said. I would go out on a limb and think that he had. This can't be the only time there's been a territorial battle. Connie reached over and grabbed the camera. Do you think there's something on this? She said, handing it over to me. I turned it on and I was thankful when I saw the startup screen light up. I pushed play, but the only thing that could be seen was large shadows. We knew that these shadows were there, though. We had seen them in real time. Connie shivered when she saw the size of what I told her was the Bigfoot that came into camp and crossed into their territory. So, you saw this? She asked. Did you see it full on? Luckily, no, I sighed. I saw it through the sides of the tent, in shadow. That's the size of the one that I saw with my boys. You forget over the years how big these creatures really are. It's really enough to make you question reality and everything that you've been taught. It makes you question everything you've experienced from that point on. Yeah, Marie said. Monsters really do exist. I shivered at the sound of that. I remembered my dad telling me when I was a young boy that monsters don't exist. Maybe in his world they didn't. But in my world now, they were as real as ever, and I was living with them. Now we just had to figure out what to do. What's past the second creek, Henry? I asked. Not too much, really. Just more land, some power lines, and then maybe a half a mile or so from there is Otis's property. Well, what used to be his property? Why do you ask? I had been thinking about this all the while. I just hadn't said anything to anybody. I was trying to piece it all together in my mind. That one Bigfoot came into camp, but it knew that Henry and I were in the Dogman's territory. Why would the Bigfoot go up there knowing that we were there? They didn't want anything to do with the pack of Dogmen. I pulled out the papers from the manila envelope and found a map. This was the key. It had everything laid out with all the wood and property lines. It even showed the two creeks that are on our property. If you follow the second creek we stayed at, you run into the power lines, and then you would hit Otis's house. They're following the power lines, but they can't get to them any other way than through the Dogman's territory. From what I've read and heard, and what John can confirm as well, they follow the power lines for hunting and communication. So that must mean that the night he came into our camp, he had no doubt just come from the power lines. It would have no other reason to be up there. Honestly, this was probably just a regular occurrence for these Bigfoot, and the only reason the Dogman spotted it was because we were there. It stuck around, like I had said, because it was curious. Well, there's no question that everything that we've learned thus far will help us in the long run. These Dogmen on the upper part of the property are the ones that need to go. As Henry said, the other ones are controlled by the Bigfoot on the property, and the fact that he hadn't been here to allow them to leave the wood line. So even when this curse is broken and these hell beasts are sent back to where they came from, you guys should still be okay with the other Dogmen here, John said. But we still have to find a way to help Henry break this, Connie said. Yeah, Marie chimed in. Where do we stand with that information? Can't he just do what he did before and send them back? Henry sighed. I'm afraid not, little lady. The only way to undo it is by my own undoing. Marie gasped. What does that mean? Does that mean you have to die to undo the curse? We all sat around the table, quiet and almost mournful at what she had just said. We all knew what he meant, but she hadn't been around here to be fully filled in on that part. Well, we can't let that happen. We won't let that happen. You're our friend, Marie said. Henry chuckled. I appreciate it. I don't want that to be the end of my story, but it would be a crazy, fantastical way to go. At least Henry had a positive attitude about everything. I can't say that I would if I had been in his shoes. I decided to take some time and poke around online to look at ways to break curses. Most everything I found was people trying to sell fake ingredients that would supposedly break curses, and even if I wanted to buy them, the time they would take to reach us wouldn't help us anyway. I decided the next day I would head to the library, and Henry came along with me. I figured that would be the best way to find out what we needed to. I was apprehensive because he had tweaked the spell so much for his sons, but I thought maybe at least we could find a way to break the main potion, and the rest would just fall away. Henry and I got to the library as soon as they opened and started searching for anything that had to do with cryptids and curses. There were thousands of books, and unlike any other library I'd seen before, this library had 2 floors. Surely we could find something that would help us here. Even if it weren't exactly what we were looking for, maybe it would lead us to something that could help. We each gathered stacks of books and took them over to the table to look through them. I was floored at everything I was seeing. Pages and pages of folklore, cryptids, curses, spells, both fiction and nonfiction alike. Henry was like a kid in a candy store, and I can't say that I blamed him. We pored over page after pages for hours, it seemed. Over that period of time, I learned about all kinds of things I'd never heard before. Some of those things I wish I could forget. I walked back over to the shelves to put a majority of the books back that I'd selected, and Henry sat at the table. While I was there at the shelf, I found a book about dogmen and I took it back to the table. "What do you have there?" Henry said as he glanced up. "You know that's a fiction book, right? We need nonfiction." I smirked. "No, I get it. I know we do. But from what I've heard, though, there's always a touch of truth in every fiction story you read. I'm just covering all my bases. That's all." Henry just shook his head and stuck his nose right back into the book he was reading. It was actually nice reading something that I knew wasn't real pertaining to these creatures. It helped me to relax knowing that I could put the book down and I could leave it there. Unfortunately, I had a real dogman tale going on at my house. Sadly, I couldn't just close the book on that one and go about my day. Henry got up and found a few more nonfiction titles and brought them back to the table. "How's your search going, Henry?" I asked. "Finding anything useful?" Henry raised his head. "I think so. More than I thought we would. Nothing concrete, though. I think I'm going to ask the librarian if they have any older titles on this subject. These all seem to have more of a modern twist. I need something that goes back further, like something in the archives." I watched him stand up from the table and put the books back, except for the one that he was going to the desk to talk to the librarian about. She walked around the desk with a key in her hand, and he followed behind her. They walked to a door on the off side of the main shelves, and they went inside after she unlocked the door. "I really hope there's something inside that room that we can use. This may be his last chance." I decided to move to one of the more comfortable chairs to wait on Henry to return. Not long after, Henry came out with some dusty old books in his hand that were ragged in appearance. He had a smile stretched across his face, so I could only assume that he had found what he was looking for. "She said I could take these with me. I'm almost positive this is what I needed the whole time," he said, grinning. I couldn't fault him for his excitement. As he said, those books could be the undoing he was searching for. We went to the front and he checked those out, and I checked out the one that I was reading as well. It may be fiction, but it really had my attention and I wanted to see how it ended. When we got back home, Henry sat out on the back deck, turning his pages constantly. He had come in once and asked for a notebook and a pen, and I happily obliged. He spent the rest of the afternoon reading and taking notes voraciously. I have to say that once all this was over with, I was really going to miss him being here. He had turned out to be a really good friend. He told Connie and I that he had been staying with a friend not far from our house, but I don't know for sure that that's true. He could have been sleeping on the streets for all we knew. Wherever he was staying, it had to be close to our property for him to be able to walk here every night. I often wondered how this would have turned out had we not set up those trail cams and found Henry sitting out there. We would still be running around in circles doing the same thing to solve this on our own, or worse yet, not hunting, hiking, or fishing, and possibly even having to move. But this had turned out to be our story, our own adventure. We were all like characters in a story someone else was telling. Pieces of a chessboard being moved where we needed to be at just the right time. Pretty ironic if you ask me. I just hope our story has a happy ending. We sat at dinner later that night, just the three of us, all talking and laughing. We had decided we were going to table the subject of cryptids, even if it was just for one evening so we could have a normal dinner. It was nice. We all went to bed more relaxed than we had been since this whole thing started. The next morning started early, but mentally I felt better than I had in a long time. Stress is hard to carry, and we had all been carrying it for long enough. I sat on the deck and read my Dogman book and drank my coffee. This was the peace that I needed. Connie stuck her head out the door and told me that breakfast was ready, so I went back in, almost eager to be able to go back outside and finish my book. "You're living a Dogman story, Mark," Connie chuckled. "Why are you reading that?" I had been waiting for that. I knew that she was waiting for just the right moment to rib me about it. It's like I told Henry, Connie. This one I can put down and walk away from anytime I want. With our story, I can't. Henry walked in with his books and carried them to the table on the deck. He began telling us about everything that he had read, and he thought that he had maybe found the answer to the curse. "That's great," Connie exclaimed. As he ate, he went on to tell us that he would indeed have to go back to the place in the woods where he performed the first one. He asked our permission because he knew how Connie felt about that. "So what all do you have to do for the reversal?" I asked curiously. "I don't know what all you had to do the first time, but I would think to undo it, you would have to do something different." He downed the rest of his orange juice and said, "Yeah, it will be different, herbs and such. Nothing too big, though. Apparently to break it, it takes less than it took to cast it. Strange, but according to this book, that's what it says." Connie gathered all the dishes and took them into the sink. "Well, whatever you need, just let us know, and we'll help you get it." I sat with Henry on the deck as he went through the books again, still taking notes. He was feverishly writing as fast as he was reading. I admired his tenacity. More so, I admired his patience through everything that he had been through, not just recently, but since this whole thing started. "Where did you perform the first ritual again, Henry?" I asked. He leaned back in his seat and laid the pen on the notebook. "Right there in the clearing where I was sitting. I'll have to go back there to try to reverse it." I had completely forgotten about that. If he were there when he performed it, that would make sense that the Dogman I shot was right there as well. So him reversing it right there would hopefully be successful in making them go away. "When do you want to do the reversal, Henry?" I asked almost excitedly. "I would think soon, right?" He laughed. "Yeah, as soon as possible. It's time that this is taken care of one way or the other. I know you said you would help me with anything I need, and it turns out that I will need your help, according to this book." "Sure, Henry. What can I help you with?" I asked. He looked at me hesitantly. "Your blood."
This is your, but you can't stay. Here, roll out. Right there. Yes, sure. With sure, we're gonna trust right. It's true. Yes, my hat, my hat, don't you really thundering around? Afraid. Meg. Please. Ryan.